here. The New York Times reporter Sydney Ember, I believe, consistently paints a negative picture of Sanders' temperament, history, and political prospects. The Washington Post once famously ran 16 negative stories about Sanders in the same number of hours, and its in-house fact-checker Glenn Kessler has racked up enough Pinocchios to stuff a landfill elongated with wooden noses, wooden noses. Nonetheless, a new and systematic look at MSNBC's recent campaign coverage offers an astonishing empirical snapshot of the media bias facing Sanders in his quest for the Democratic nomination. In this case, from what is ostensibly America's liberal cable network, limiting its analysis to coverage of the race's three leading candidates by the network's major primetime shows: The 11th Hour with Brian Williams, All In with Chris Hayes, The Beat with Ari Melber, and with Chris Harbaugh with Chris Matthews, Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, and The Rachel Maddow Show. In August and September, the study published in these Times and authored by Jacobin's own Branko Marcetic should later rest once and for all the notion of the media's bias against the Vermont senator is a figment of his supporters' imaginations. Among other things, Sanders received far less coverage than either Joe Biden or Elizabeth. That's where we get the term Bernie blackout. In August and September coverage by total mentions, MSNBC talks about Biden twice as often as Warren and 3 times as often as Sanders. By the number of episodes, 64% of the 240 episodes discussed Biden, 43% discussed Warren, and just 36 discussed Sanders. A quarter of the episodes only discussed Biden compared to 5 and 1 that mentioned only Warren and Sanders respectively. So when the network's talking heads did mention Sanders, their coverage was most likely to be critical in tone. Sanders was the least likely positive pitch with 12.9% of his mentions. Damn. And most likely to be mentioned negatively at 20.7% of his mentions. The remaining 2/3 of his mentions were neutral. Warren had the lowest proportion of negative coverage. No surprise there. I mean, look at her recent surge in the polls. Let's see. Excuse me. He had the highest proportion of overall mentions there. MSNBC's Warren had the lowest proportion of negative coverage in all 3 candidates, just 7.9% of her mentions, and the highest proportion of position mentions, 30.6. So pretty much what they're saying here is, and this, I mean, if you look at the way the polls has been going here, it kind of makes sense, because what they're saying is here that Warren was mentioned the most and talked about the most positively. And that's why I think a big reason why she's been able to actually go up in the polls in such a way, right? So that's really a big part of I think what we see. So NBC's determination to frame Sanders' campaign and his prospects in the least favorable light emerged in a number of ways. Deploying familiar tropes about electability is a big one, and obsessing where poll results and the networks frequently portrayed Sanders' proposals as unrealistic and lacking in detail, suggested his campaign was losing steam, even when the available evidence indicated otherwise, and boosted demonstrably incorrect claims about the demographic breakdown of his support. And this is something that I think is pretty funny. The thing that's been on Twitter is that I've seen a lot on Twitter is the idea that there has been a drop of support. Like they show literally New York Times trying to write articles about is New Hampshire falling out of love with Bernie Sanders? Like, are they falling out of love with Bernie Sanders here? Is this a real problem? For example, this article here is New Hampshire falling out of love with Bernie. So that one's up. And just later on, there's literally a poll, and this is on the Reddit, Bernie Sanders, and it kind of just tracks the intentional media blackout of kind of Bernie Sanders and what he's been trying to do. I'm just going to look into this a little bit more. But yeah, that little clip was followed literally within 24 hours by an Emerson poll showing that, he's leading. So it's either just a continuing downplay, pushing out of the sign, pushing out of the spotlight, just like, Bernie, it's not your time. You got to move on. Like, we're getting rid of you. Just shh, go away. Like, that's really what it seems like. That's what the at least the impression that I get. And I think the stats back it up. And I think the next time someone tries to tell you that, play them this video, show them this podcast, because it is a real, factual, documentable thing that is happening here. It's very, very clear to see that there has been a documented, I think, bias against Bernie. That's, I think, I mean, whether you like him or not, that's something you just, I think, have to conclude at this point. So, yeah, we're going to move on now to a very interesting story about the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Here's what's happening on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. We have Newsflash, always new every Sunday, and, of course, with new episodes occasionally on Thursdays, bonus episodes. Also for you, we have Red Alert, new at 11 p.m. every Monday, Uncultured, new at 8:30 p.m., live at 8:30 p.m. every Friday, the best mix show in the game. And also, we have a brand new line out, repping your generation, insulting the old world, repping the young world. Our new OK Boomer merch line is out now. Check it out on Spreaker.com/TSWS. I have to say, this story is actually pretty crazy stuff. So, this kind of all starts with Kamala Harris here. And a very interesting, one of two articles by the two kind of prestige newspapers, the New York Times and the Washington Post, about how Kamala Harris's campaign is literally unraveling as we speak in quite a big way. And I do want to go through this article, kind of break it down, and kind of say what it means for the 2020 Democratic primary here. So, yeah, I do apologize. We've had a little bit of a kind of a 2020 heavy show here and video spate recently, but it is a lot of what's going on in the news right now. We're not going to go through all of this. It's a very, very long article, as you can see. But, yeah, I do want to start because there's some very interesting things to go kind of all throughout this. So it kind of sets the scene here in the early November, a few days after Kamala's presidential campaign announced widespread layoffs and intensified focus in Iowa. Her senior aides gathered for a staff meeting at their headquarters in Baltimore and pelted the campaign manager, Juan Rodriguez, with some some tough questions here. He wanted to know what the hell was going on. Pretty much what was Harris' new strategy, how much manpower could they put into Iowa, and because Iowa is a state where you need people on the ground. Like, I think Iowa, California, a state which does happen to be her home state, and a state that she's not polling too well in, by the way. She needs some real support in those areas. So that is a big part of what she's trying to do, and it's a big part of any successful presidential campaign. And I think one of the main reasons why people like Bernie and Warren and I think Buttigieg, the main reason why he's been able to get so successful is not just favorable media coverage, but a real investment, granted somewhat funded by billionaires. But it is like that investment that you can put in Iowa, if you can put it into Iowa, it's a big deal. It goes a long way to help. And that's something Kamala Harris just did not do for a very, very long time early on in Iowa. If you're running a presidential campaign, you really got to try and win Iowa. And she just wasn't trying to. She just wasn't putting any effort in there. And that was just really devastating, I think, to her prospects in a big, big way. So that kind of was the thing that these people wanted to ask, the staffers really kind of wanted to ask Juan Rodriguez about. Some Harris aides sitting at the table could barely suppress their fury about what they saw as an undoing of a once promising campaign. Their feelings were reflected days later by Kelly Mellenbacher, the state operations director, in a blistering resignation letter obtained by the New York Times. And I just want to read it a little bit here to you. This is it. To whom it may concern, it is with a heavy heart I submit my resignation as state operations director. for Kamala Harris for the People, effective November 30th, 2019. This is my third presidential campaign, and I have never seen an organization treat its staff so poorly. While I believe that Senator Harris is the strongest candidate to win the general election in 2020, I no longer have confidence in our campaign or its leadership. The treatment of our staff over the last 2 weeks was the final straw in this very difficult decision. It is not acceptable to me that we encourage people to move from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore only to lay them off with no notice, with no plan for the campaign, and without thoughtful consideration of the personal consequences to them or the consequences that their absence would have on the remaining staff. It is unacceptable that we would lay off anyone that we hired only weeks earlier. It is unacceptable that with the less than 90 days until Iowa, we still do not have a real plan to win. Our campaign for the people is made up of diverse talent, which is being squandered by indecision and a lack of leaders who will lead. This is unacceptable. And again, it really is the kind of reality of the situation here. If you're Kamala Harris, like, she's no plan for Iowa. She just does not have any plan for Iowa in the slightest. And no kind of ground game, no cohesive, like, her ducks are just not in a row, to say the least. And she could have been a real threat. Like, if more of the Democratic Party kind of had a better sense, I feel like, of her potential and kind of the damage she could really do to an establishment campaign that we know they want to stop in Bernie Sanders, like, they could get right on that, and they could get really serious about trying to stop her presidential campaign and or trying to get in front of her presidential campaign. But she's absolutely failed to get a competent staff here. So when morale has never been lower and additional people, even if only 3 are laid off, and then neither the campaign manager or the chair addresses the staff to explain, apologize, or reassure us of decisions being made in the path forward, something has got to give. Presidential campaigns are incredibly challenging work, and for good reason. We're asking people to trust us to look out for them and have their best interests at heart. Campaigns have highs and lows, mistakes and miscalculations, lessons learned, and adjustments made, but because we have refused to confront our mistakes, foster an environment of critical thinking and honest feedback, or trust the expertise of talented staff, we find ourselves making the same unforced errors over and over, and certainly does not help the team to read about campaign discord in Politico or various other publications, because those with things to say have decided the best way to air their grievances in the press instead of to leadership. This is not how I would have ever imagined my time of the campaign ending, and like I said, this was not an easy decision. I only hope my departure might result in some serious consideration of our structure, our goals, our internal communication, and what our organizational values are. We really have amazing people on the staff, and I hate for anyone to blah, blah, blah. Pretty much the idea is, like, we could do much better than we are doing, and the leadership screwing it up. That's pretty much, I think that's a pretty fair view to say. If you look at what Kamala Harris has and what she's been able to get from what she is really bringing to the table, I think Kamala Harris is a deeply, deeply flawed candidate. And it's not just the leadership here. It's her, I think, to a large degree as well. But, and we'll get into that. But, yeah, I really do want to get into what kind of caused this come down. But I think factor number one, you could put it as leadership really failing to put in place a real strategy to win, and that, I think, is kind of really relatable to we really kind of it's correlative, I guess you could say, to the mindset of the candidate. Like, if there's no candidate who's coming in there and actually trying to constantly check in and say, how are we doing? Are we getting to a good place? Are we trying to make a plan here? Are we trying to make a plan there? Like, it is hard to just make one on your own without the input of the candidate. And the input of the candidate is just not really present here. Yeah, so the Times article continues, from those polling results to Harris's campaign operation, fundraising, and debate performances, it has been a remarkable come down for a senator from the country's largest state, a politician with star power who was compared to President Obama even before Californians elected her to the Senate in 2016. Yet even to some Harris allies, the decline is more predictable than surprising. In one instance after another, Harris and her closest advisors have made flawed decisions about which states to focus on, issues to emphasize, and opponents to target, all while refusing to make difficult personnel choices to impose order on an unwieldy campaign, according to more than 50. That's a number I want to highlight time and time again. 50 people. That is insane. Normally for these stories, it's like 3 or 4. Like, that's it. 10 is something that raises people's eyebrows. 50 is bat bleep crazy. Like, 50 is where you got to take a step back and say,